before anything, I was writing books. I wrote and published a novel that was terrible. I was 17, published it when I was 21. It was an awful, awful book. But I was doing that first. I'd like to think that I'm a storyteller more than anything.
Hello, and welcome to the Randall Osche podcast, where we create a safe space for meaningful and thought-provoking conversations. We have long-form interviews with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, artists, and changemakers in order to deconstruct their journeys and to pass out valuable life lessons and life-changing perspectives for listeners like yourself, so that you can, as Randall says, learn their lessons without their scars. So whether you're tuning in on your daily commute or during a workout or cooking dinner, we are happy to have you join us. So take a seat, relax, grab a cup of tea, and join the conversation. Now, let's dive into this week's episode.
All right, Greg, appreciate you making the time to meet with me today and have another hopefully interesting conversation. We were chatting a little bit about this before we started recording, but real name Greg Pryor, but you're AKA Caster. Why don't you get into that as we kick it off?
Okay, so that actually came from the career path I had planned before I got into cooking. So I was actually a screenwriter, not very successful. Did like one feature, which was not great, and then a couple of shorts. And I had written a screenplay called CasterAzucar. And it was about a woman in Cuba. She died, and her husband hot-wired her brain with a PlayStation and a car battery. And the game that took over, there's a game that basically takes over her mind, and the character in that game is CasterAzucar. And it's a race to the bottom of the moral limits of this particular game. And that character does that. And it all started when Obama became president and opened up relations with Cuba. It sort of killed the script. And so I was getting into cooking, and I wanted it to be anonymous initially. And so I just picked a name out of one of the screenplays, and CasterAzucar seemed semi-relevant because it was about food.
Oh, yeah. Now that makes sense to me. I've put it together. So I think that brings up an interesting question for me. How did you get into cooking? How did that start?
Well, it's sort of been a long lifetime thing. I've not really been like as intensely into it as I am now. But around about 2016, I was doing film. I was attempting to make movies. I was into photography, and I was cooking what do you guys call it? A fillet steak, but like a full fillet steak. And I was working out how to do a butcher tie. And so I looked down at the chopping board, and it looked really nice. So I took a photo and uploaded it to Instagram. And that's how the Instagram part started. But in terms of recipe creation and recipe invention, that's sort of been going on for as long as I can remember. My dad is the main cook of the house, still is to this day. Although now that I'm back, I've moved back to New Zealand in case now that I'm back, it's sort of like we're toing and froing over who does what. But Dad is very good at recipe invention, so I grew up watching him. And I guess that sort of filtered down into who I am. And so creation is a deep part of me, I think.
So self-taught.
Self-taught, never been to culinary school. I don't know if I necessarily want to go. I draw a very, very distinct line between a cook and a chef. And some people will say I'm a chef, but I'm not. I'm a cook. I don't have the rigor required to do chefing and the reproducibility of it and making everything perfect exactly the same time. I don't think I've ever cooked the same dish twice.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I would also distinguish between the two. I mean, I started cooking in a restaurant, I think at like 17, but I'm not going to say the food was good. And there's a difference to me between being a line cook and being a chef. Like if you tell me cook a mass amount of food over like dinner rush and you show me how to do it, I can probably execute on that. But by no means am I as competent as a chef would be, right?
Yeah, but I think you'd get to a stage where you were able to reproduce things to a very, very particular standard each time, in which case I would say you actually are a chef, because I think chefing is like a hybrid of creativity and the ability to reproduce something perfectly every time.
I would agree The other thing too I think about is you can be a good at home cook, and sometimes good at home cooks are like, I want to open up a restaurant because I'm a good at home cook. And then you just don't understand that a restaurant's like a food factory, right?
Yep.
It's not about cooking one dish well or cooking one dish well for 6 people at a table. It's about doing that the same way 200 times a night. Like, how do you keep the mashed potatoes warm without making them terrible, right? And cooking again the same food and etc. So there's a bit of a difference between all of that. So self-taught. Have you ever cooked in a restaurant before?
No, and I
I
don't
would
want
have
to.
definitely thought either definitely professionally trained, or had at least spent time cooking in a restaurant. So good for you.
I think a lot of the things I do though are impractical in terms of executing in a restaurant. I mean, I'll cook stuff and I'll use certain methods. I've had chefs comment on it before, but they'll be like, "There's better ways to do that," and I'm like, "I know. Oh well, I don't know, but yeah, cool."
The one video that you did comes to mind where you cooked pizzas in like the wood stove. You like
Oh, and
retro.
fireplace.
I don't
Yeah.
think that you could have necessarily pulled that off the same way.
No,
And
I mean, I bought a frying pan specifically for that video because it was the only one that would fit in a hole. It was a crepe pan, a DeBio crepe pan. Absolutely nuked the handle. The paint or whatever was coated and came off. I still kept using it, but like that poor thing didn't know what it had coming.
Book recommendation, by the way. Have you ever heard of Pancakes in Paris?
Nope. I am going to Google that right now.
Pancakes in Paris, written by Craig Carlson. Yes. Also involved in screenwriting or Hollywood in some sort of way, and decided to, I guess, immigrate from America to Paris to open up a restaurant. Good read.
That's brave.
Good read. Yeah. Good read. The short of it is he really loved Paris, and when he returned home to the States, he realized that the only thing he actually missed was an American breakfast. So his dream was to have pancakes in Paris, I suppose. But
I think that works great. I mean, when I was living with a French guy for a while back here in New Zealand, like 15 years ago, and whenever he came out, the only thing he would want to eat was McDonald's. So French people aren't above that sort of food, they'll be like, McDonald's, I just went to McDonald's.
I love that. So screenwriting to not working, not necessarily in this order, but not working in a restaurant, not a professional chef, but your content would lead people to believe otherwise, and that's a compliment to you. But how did you get on that path?
Well, the screenwriting, I think I was secretly just looking for a way to be creative, because all through film school, you were just making content, making short films, using video cameras, and I wanted a way to express myself again. And I think Instagram and video, and it just sort of all came together in sort of like one unit. And so you'll often see in a lot of my videos, even in my short ones, there's a lot of sort of like fanciful stuff in there that is not really relevant to cooking. I mean, I think there's the French focaccia video, and then there's a video where I learned a little bit of Portuguese so I could like recreate what it might have been like in the time when they were eating this particular dish. And so I think it was just finding a platform that would allow me to express my creativity and also express ideas, because one of the other things I was looking for is a way to share information and share knowledge and share inspiration without necessarily charging people for it. So I sort of believe in the freedom of information to some extent, with some limitations. But I think that Instagram at the time fit the bill really well. And then once I got the confidence built up, YouTube was definitely the place to go. It's a great platform.
YouTube?
Yeah, YouTube. I love it. I spend most of my time on YouTube.
I've migrated to spending more of my entertaining hours on YouTube. I find people like yourself, those stories more interesting, right? For various reasons. Well, first, I want to say that your voiceovers, I think it's starting to make more sense to me, because I think I've like commented before that I think your voiceovers are phenomenal. They have this perfect balance between the food, the art of cooking, humor, and like your own voice coming through. And I think they're exceptionally done. But now that I know screenwriting background, like that has to do something with it, right?
I think so. Also, I think because of that, it misses a lot. Like, I don't hit the audience I think I could hit if I go down a slightly more traditional route. And I think there's a lot of other things in terms of the voiceover is often like far more ridiculous than the food actually is. I'm not like Max the Meat Guy or Jort's Kitchen making pizzas out of chicharron and stuff like that. I'm sort of just making normal food, but with slightly ridiculous voiceovers. I think I enjoy that part a lot. And I enjoy the pure creativity of writing a voiceover and trying to make it relevant. Sort of like square peg, round hole, but it gets there in the end.
How long would you say, like on your average, well, I guess two questions I would be curious, between the whole process, like soup to nuts, coming up with the recipe, cooking the recipe, and then editing and posting the video, but specifically what we were talking about, the voiceover part, like how much time is involved into that separately?
Okay, so the whole process beginning to end, on a good day, half a day. On a bad day, it takes days and days. Depends on what the recipe is, because a lot of the time, if it's like sous vide or something like that, sometimes I'll stick it in there for a couple of days, and often I screw things up and have to do it again. But a lot of the time, we don't see that because internet and editing magic. So I'd say on average, we're looking at a day. So 8 hours would be like the absolute maximum I'd want to spend on a video. And then in terms of writing, well, sometimes I'll edit the video and then I'll wait for days and days and days and days. And I don't consider that active time, but then eventually a topic or a sort of like an angle for the video pops into my mind. And then usually after that, once I've got the direction, it's 30, 40 minutes maximum. I'd consider if I was spending days writing 30 seconds to a minute's worth of writing, I'd say that would be pretty unproductive. But
yeah, I had the great idea that I wanted to make some food content. And my thought process at the time was like, well, I cook every day anyways. It might not be like super fancy, but I can just be a little bit more diligent and deliberate about the recipes I want to cook, set up my phone and record. And then I realized it's two very different things. Cooking for yourself for dinner and then trying to eat it while it's warm and then also documenting the process is work. And it is an 8-hour day to do everything. And I have, just for fun, I do it now, and I still have recipes I've cooked where the content hasn't made its way anywhere because I haven't edited together. I'm not even trying to recreate what you do. I'm just trying to put like some clips together, right, for 30 seconds.
I think once you've got a process, it becomes less difficult. I mean, I shot some stuff just recently, but like I haven't shot anything with any sort of consistency in a while. And if you get into a rhythm where you're just used to setting up your camera angles and just getting everything going, I think then it becomes okay. But I think where the challenge is for me is that I never make it simple enough. So I've got a camera, and you may notice that most shots have a different angle. Most shots I've moved the camera, or I'm going from overhead to the side, and I've got one camera and I'm doing this while I'm cooking. And it does get really stressful, and I don't necessarily enjoy that process. And so when I can take some time to actually just cook and not film, it's really nice. But I think if you wanted to do that, it would be just a case. This is sort of applies to anything that I'm doing, at least. Once you get into a rhythm of doing something consistently and you form a habit, then the creativity, so I still want to keep the creativity and not have like the shots that I select be a routine. But like if I can do that and get into the rhythm of just selecting new shots every time, it sort of comes a lot easier. Like way back, before I had kids, I was producing a video like 3-4 times a week. And you get used to that. You get to the rhythm, the stress sort of like comes to an equilibrium, and then suddenly it's just okay. But now I look at it and then you're like, oh my gosh, it seems like such a hurdle. I've got a video that I need to make that's relatively simple. I'm going to, with the griddle that I've been using, the razor griddle, I want to cut a piece of cork and plug up the hole and then deep fry on this griddle, right? But for some reason I just keep putting it off. So it's just one of those things I need to get back in. I think it's like a flow state. If you can get into a flow state, like everything becomes so much easier. But,
I want to jump to the razor griddle, but yeah, I find the same thing as well, right? I've always worked out, but the last 93 days, I've really upped the intensity. And there's a couple things that have helped me do that. And I'm happy because I've seen the results, or I'm seeing the results. But one of them is I did a newsletter for like 2023. So I counted the number of years I've been like consistently working out, 27, right? I would think I'd be on the cover of Men's Health already, right? But not quite there. So, but I, reached out to a personal trainer online. He gave me a program. So I've been following the program, and the program became with an Excel sheet. So I track everything in Excel. Where I was doing it before, I've never tracked it before. And I think that was one of the mechanisms that has helped hold me accountable. And then I don't know what, like I wanted to see more results more quickly, or he gave me a new program. But then I went from 3 days a week to lifting 4 days a week, and then running 2 days a week. So I'm working out 6 days a week when I was only working out 5 days a week before. And now I'm doing 7 days a week. And looking back, if myself that was only working out 5 days a week would say like, "Oh, you're working out 7 days a week. That's not necessary. You're like, that's too much." It's like, it's fine. It's normal.
You
for
can
me
do
now.
it. I mean, I had the same experience during COVID. Suddenly, everyone's wearing masks. No one's on the train. When I was in London, no one's on the train when I still had to go to work. And I didn't get sick for a year and a half. I ran every day for a year and a half. And then I got sick, and now I need to get back on that bandwagon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to get sick, and I'm certain that exercising pretty consistently helps. But yeah, it's easier to stay doing it. Like, it's easier probably to stay creating content than if you stop and then try to start again. Like,
Inertia.
whatever that pace is, keep the pace,
Yeah.
But you said razor griddle. I want to dive into razor griddle a little bit. Couple things. Talk about your creativity, because like, wow, I didn't know you could use a razor griddle for so many different things. So kudos to you for executing and making it entertaining simultaneously. But talk to me a little bit about how you made that sort of like your thing.
Well, they actually approached me, and I thought they were joking at first because I was living in London. It's an American company. So Cassie, if she happens to listen to this at some point, I'll send her the link. But she was working for an agency based out of Atlanta, and she approached me, and she's like, "Hey, I wondered if you wanted to do some work with these griddles. I really like your content. Can you make some stuff with these griddles?" And I was like, "Sounds great. I'd love a griddle, but I'm actually based in London. You're in the States. But, I would love to, but that doesn't seem feasible." And she's like, "No, it's fine." And then they ended up sending me seven of these huge griddles, and yeah, they just agreed to it. And basically, they sort of left it to me in terms of coming up with stuff. I pushed the boundaries pretty hard right out of the gate, stressed out some of the people in the management because they invited me out to a trade show in Vegas, and there's another marketing or like sort of marketing guy, Lukáš, who's based out of the Czech Republic. And I'd been liaising with him as to like what content I needed to make. And we were sitting at In-N-Out in Vegas, and we're just eating these burgers. It's my first ever In-N-Out. And I turned to Lukáš and I'm like, "Hey." And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "So I've got this video coming out in the next couple of days. It's the horse burger." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, it's going to be posted. It's fine. XYZ." And, we're just like chatting about it real casually. And then Drew, the marketing manager, he's like, puts down his burger. He's like, "Sorry, what?" And he's like, "What did you say?" I said, "It's a horse burger." He's like, "It's as big as a horse?" No, I was like, "It's actually horse." And he's like, "No, we can't post that." He's like, you can post it on your account, but you're not posting it on ours." And so basically went through a whole list of things that I couldn't cook. So he was like, camel was a no, moose was a yes. So I ended up like leaning into the moose quite hard. Zebra, no. So basically, there's a whole list of things that I've cooked, but aren't necessarily affiliated with them. But kudos to them; they've really allowed me to express my creativity. And as I always say when I'm talking about the griddle, is that I see it as a blank canvas, And I've been able to move these things around the world. They're like, this sounds like an ad now. It's not an ad. I suppose, yeah. But I've been able to move these things around the world and just cook on them, and they've given me a reliable income to keep doing what I'm doing and to keep supporting a lot of the work that is completely unpaid, which is like most of the Instagram posts, because I don't take, you get sponsorship offers all the time, but if they're not really relevant to my audience, I don't feel like advertising something to your audience where they've come to watch you cook. They've come to watch things that are food related, and you start advertising like hair loss supplements or something like that. I don't necessarily think that I would want to watch that. So I try to keep things as relevant as possible. So
Yeah.
they've been my only sponsor for 2 years or something. So
I like it. One of the restaurants I worked in did have a flat top grill, and that was fun to cook on. Like, that was fun. I mean, I didn't cook as many different things on there, as many different ways as you try, but you can have different sections, different temperatures. You can cook different things at the same time. You can keep things warm when other things need to be hot. Like, it's fun.
yeah, it's for sure. And obviously some of the things I try to cook on the griddle are not practical. Like ribs are probably best done in a smoker or like in the oven, or maybe even over a grill where the heat is like more evenly applied. In that one case, I find that grills work, but it doesn't mean to say you can't get it done. But I think it's more a case of showing people that, like, for me, the griddle is a great way for people to get accessibility to creativity and food, get people cooking. And so that's really what led me to say, yeah, okay, let's do this crazy thing. Well, even it's not that crazy now that I think about it, but like getting people creative with food has always been one of the main objectives of what I'm doing, and they help me a lot. Yeah.
The other thing I think of there's a quote from, I think it's actually Matthew McConaughey. I heard it from him in his book, Green Lights, but I think he said it since then. I think we can attribute it to him, or maybe he's repeating it from somebody else. Nonetheless, it's that too many options make tyrants out of us all. And I think if you have like all the, like, I hate kitchen gadgets and gizmos. I need 2 knives. I need a paring knife, and I need a chef's knife. I need a cutting board and a frying pan and a baking sheet. Maybe you could do so many with that, and everything else to me is just noise. So I think if you can reduce the noise and pare down what you actually need to cook a meal, that's going to help you, instead of figuring out, oh, I want to cook something, I need to go, I'm a new cook, perhaps I need to go stock my. No, you just need a couple things.
I think you're 100% correct. I mean, there's virtue in going the slightly more difficult route and getting a better result. I mean, for me, the big bugbear is chimichurri. So when chimichurri gets into a food processor, I'm just like, it's a texture thing as well as like a flavor thing. And so I was always taught with chimichurri that you have to mince it with a knife. Spend the time mincing it with a knife. You get smaller chunks, you get bigger chunks. You end up with this really nice sort of like salsa, as opposed to just a homogeneous green pulp. I've never owned a food processor. I've got like a whiz stick. What do you guys call them? An immersion blender.
Yeah, immersion blender.
But like that and a sous vide, although I don't actually have one now because it's way back in life. But I'm a believer in whatever the kitchen offers is what you're cooking with. So that's part of the whole, my YouTube series, Airbnb Feast, is basically getting into a kitchen that's completely foreign. You don't know what's in it, and trying to cook a meal with what's available. With what's available in food locally, and also how are you going to get through this meal when you've got just a paring knife or something like that. So,
and I think it makes you better, right?
Yes.
It makes you better because you can think more creatively. And again, you don't need a ton of things if you can make do with what you have. I like to cook. I probably started to think that way as like a poor college student, where I couldn't go out and buy the things I wanted to buy, the ingredients that I wanted to buy, or like the cooking gear I wanted to buy. So it's like, oh, whatever we have here in this rental is whatever's however we're gonna get the job done.
I feel that, man. I feel that. And I'm guessing you created some pretty fantastic meals out of that as well. I mean, for the time. I mean, I remember back when I moved into a office building, one of my many poor decisions in life, moved into this office building that had a kitchen, but I had no money because the office cost so much. And I was like living in there. And so there was this Chinese-run grocery store in Auckland. And every day I'd go in and I'd get the cheapest cut of meat I could find. And it was usually like beef shin. Oh my goodness. Some of the meals were great. Some of the meals were absolutely horrendous. It's like string.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if there's anything that sticks out to me. I think definitely have cooked some good meals in Airbnbs. I spent 3 weeks in Europe this summer and spent time in various Airbnbs. We'll say 4 or 5. And then say like in 3 or 4 of those Airbnbs, they all had like the same basic IKEA special starter kit. Because I'm curious, I'll look at the brand like, oh, this is nice or not nice. And like, oh, what brand is it, right? Then it's just a habit. And then the next Airbnb, I was like, oh, this looks familiar. And during that 3-week period across, Spain and Portugal and Madeira, which is still, I guess, a part of Portugal, they all had the same stuff. And, it's not the best, but it gets the job done. Right.
So what did you cook in Madeira? Because when I went there, I found like fillet steak for the cheapest I've ever seen it. I was like, this isn't real, is it?
I don't remember what we cooked, actually. It was
one of those nights.
I do remember I wasn't doing much of the cooking. The girl I was with was doing the cooking. We went to the grocery store, didn't get olive oil. So while she was cooking, I was trying to roam around Funchal, I think is the town of Madeira, at like 9 p.m. in the evening, trying to, I don't speak Portuguese, trying to find olive oil and then negotiate with restaurants that happen to be open. I just need some olive oil. Like,
that's committed, man. That's so committed.
I was so frustrated as I remember this story because as a restaurant person, you don't go to restaurants with random requests like that if they're busy. Like they got the dinner rush going on. So I wasn't going to restaurants that were busy and trying to be a jerk, but like, I don't want dinner here. I'm trying to cook dinner myself. I just need some olive oil because the grocery store is closed. So 2 hosts were standing out front of this restaurant and it was empty. Nobody was there. So I was like, hey, and they spoke good English, like good for them. So I didn't have to struggle as much. I was like, I just need some olive oil. Can I buy? I'm willing to overpay for the convenience of this. She's like, no, we don't sell olive oil. I was like, just put it in a cup.
Give me some bread and olive oil. I'll take the olive oil. You keep the bread.
But yeah, I'm always impressed though. Europe in general, compared to the States, the food is a higher quality, less expensive, and more accessible.
Generally, I found that to be the case as well. We even noticed it from England to Europe as well. England's got very cheap food, but it tastes, I'm sorry to any English people, but it tastes generally pretty bland. Like you go to Europe and everywhere it's just like rich, red, juicy tomatoes that are just absolutely ready. They're just amazing. Yeah, I've had that all over Europe. Some of the French markets have just been absolutely insane. And to be honest, the best one I've experienced is, I mean, this probably sounds really biased, but there's an open air market in Latvia. It's the biggest open air market in Europe. And that place just had absolutely everything, plus a entire section, like just vendors selling whatever they've got. And so there's these beautiful tomatoes that are grown in Latvia, or like the strawberries. They're so intensely flavored that you get your strawberries and then they smell on your fingers, even after washing your hands for the longest time. They're just the richest strawberries you've ever had in your life. They're only little, but my goodness, they're amazing.
Yeah.
And then conversely, going to like Costco for the first time, like last year in the States, and just been like, wow, I can buy 10 steaks for this amount of money. And then it's not necessarily going to be good. But I mean, it's one of those things where I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. Food accessibility means that the quality is slightly lower because people have got to eat, and if you've got 350 million people to feed, there's got to be some like corners cut for people to be able to eat well. If you're in the situation where you can get good food, I don't think like good food should necessarily be expensive either. Places like Whole Foods. I mean, I've got so in New Zealand, food prices have gone up rapidly over the past couple of years, and coming back was a bit of a shock. Everything's really expensive. And we've got the supermarket down the road that's widely considered to be one of the most expensive supermarkets. And you're looking at 4 avocados are going to cost like, in the height of the season, $5. And you're like, that's nuts. It shouldn't cost that much. I know avocados are a bit of a weird thing to talk about with people. So you can't have avocado toast anymore. Even like things as basic as tomatoes get super expensive. But then just down the road, you've got like a Chinese run like grocer, and it's amazing. You go in there, everything's sweet, perfect, delicious, and cheap. And you're like, what are you two doing? That's one of them is just profiteering. I've got a big thing against supermarkets at the moment. We maybe don't want to go down this rabbit hole.
Maybe we do. In July of 2022, I went to Spain, and Spain twice that year, but once in July. And I was there for work, and then in the hotel restaurant where we had lunch, it was like a buffet style, and then they had fruit. So I grabbed a banana. I'm like, I'll eat this later, right? Like just a random banana. I didn't think anything of it. And then I ate the banana. I'm like, this is the best damn banana I've ever had. Like it tastes the way a banana should taste to me. The data points are connecting with the flavor. And then I had later that year back in Spain, I have strawberries for the first time. Like, these are phenomenal. These are the best tasting strawberries I've ever had. Again, the data points are connecting. It's a red fruit and it's flavorful. And in the States, it tastes like water. The banana and the strawberries taste like watered down versions of each of the fruit. I don't know how that happens, but I was shocked. And people were shocked that I was shocked. They thought I was a lunatic, like exaggerating the difference between American food and the food that you can procure in Europe.
It's very real. It's a very real difference.
Significant. I think you brought up a good point that I didn't think of before of how do you feed, 350 million people, if that's the number. But, there should still be a way where you can get good food accessible where it doesn't cost so much like a Whole Foods. And a Whole Food, I've never had that sort of reaction to any of the produce that I bought at Whole Foods. So yeah. However they're doing it.
It's still not that good, right?
Right, yeah.
I mean, when we were in Whole Foods opened up for the first time there, And I've never been to Whole Foods in the States. And I went to Whole Foods in London, and it was just like obscenely expensive. I looked at one thing and I was like, I would spend as much on my entire shop as that one item. I think it was like salmon or something like that. And it was just crazy amounts of money, like $20 or £20 for like a fillet of like a single little shitty little piece of salmon. And looking at the way supermarkets operate here as well, because we've got a duopoly in New Zealand, there are not enough supermarkets, so there's not enough competition to drive the prices down. I know they're a business and they've got a profit here, but they also provide a service. And I think to some extent they need to be regulated, or at the very least have force a third and a fourth option to introduce more competition. As a result, people are not able to afford good food necessarily. Looking at the way something like Whole Foods operates, they sort of exist in a tier above. So they're bad for their own reasons. And it's the same thing in the UK. They've got like Waitrose as well, which also tries to elevate its stuff. So they price accordingly. And you're essentially paying for Waitrose food, but it's the same as everything else. But then there's this middle tier where things are unnecessarily expensive and they put the prices up because of inflation, but really there has been no increase in cost to them. They're just doing it because everyone else is doing it. In terms of feeding 350 million people, I think competition is good. In terms of good food, I think there needs to be more emphasis on growing and producing locally, because one thing I've noticed is imported food invariably tastes worse than, even down to stuff like Guinness, but imported food generally tastes worse. I mean, one of the first things I saw when I went into a supermarket when I moved to the UK back in 2017 was an apple from New Zealand. The mileage on that apple is obscene.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking, it's gone all the way around the world, when England used to be one of the biggest producers of apples and have fantastic apples as well. And then they just slowly just sort of let that industry fall to the wayside. And I think there needs to be sort of support for that sort of stuff.
I would agree. I think that people can do it. I think there's several reasons why. I don't know what it would be necessarily. I have a couple ideas, but I want to go down those rabbit holes necessarily. But if people had more free time where they weren't like trying to constantly grind away to earn a living to pay for their health care, then perhaps they would have the opportunity to grow some vegetables in their backyard, right? Like it can be done, and it's not like we don't have the space. If you live in a city, yes, it's going to be hard, but like there's a lot of space in the United States where you can grow some of your own food.
I'm not sure how it would work in the States, but even if to some extent there was some sort of cooperative guaranteed good food, could be, the States has like got all the climates it needs to produce basically anything. It could be a completely sustainable country if people were prepared to just eat seasonally all the time. I mean, this implies a massive culture shift, but I don't think people who need food, people like you and me, we want food, we get food, we sort of generally buy whatever we want, but there are people who are not like that, who don't have those means, and I don't think they would care to eat, you know, I think it's to some extent eating seasonally is cheapest and most effective way to do it, and so many people don't. But then there's not the one solution, you know, like the States is a very specific example, but there's so many things that plague American society in terms of politics and, you know, weirdly the availability of land for this sort of stuff. And, you know, places like San Francisco that's just seen house prices, New York and all these places where people are just like struggling to pay rent. You know, simply enacting a few of these ideas isn't going to fix the problem, but I think it would start a pathway to helping it. But I'm probably dreaming, so.
Yeah, I probably both are.
Let's take a quick break from today's episode. If you're enjoying the conversation, please take a moment to look us up. You can find Randall on Instagram at Randall Osche, that's spelled at RANDALLOSCHE. And you can catch the show notes and other resources at randallosche.com. And now back to the episode.
One of the things that this brings up that I didn't necessarily think that I would ever be talking about, but blue zones. So I'm not super familiar with blue zones, but I do know just a few documentaries, right? Watching them on YouTube probably. But people, they all seem to fall along the same lines of latitude, if I'm not mistaken. They all have similar sorts of climates, and the people live similar sorts of lifestyles. Part of that is growing their own food, and I think that produces a couple of positive outcomes. Of one, they're growing their own food, But because they're growing their own food, they're getting in their steps every day. They're bending up and down. They're walking, and being mobile and doing that is good for your health. Like we said earlier, running and working out, we feel healthier, right? We have data for ourselves that back that up. In the blue zones, right? Like that works. Let's do it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, like when you're in a situation where you live in a city and you can't necessarily do that, you can still, as we were talking about, you can still exercise and replicate the same thing, but then you also have to have the diet that comes with it. And I think a lot of the blue zones, one of the most common things between them is the slightly lower meat intake and like a high fiber, high vegetable intake. I mean, you see all these like diets and stuff, and diets will work for a while. And so one thing I've learned is that diets will work for a little while. Like, you want to gain mass, we know how to do it. You want to lose mass, you also know how to do it. And I think those blue zones sort of hit that balance like quite nicely. I mean, they're not necessarily going to go out and all be like ripped. They're going to be healthy for a long period of time.
If you look at like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, that's not a natural body for various reasons. And I'm not a scientist, and I'm not going to get into that. But he is artificial in a few different ways. And so am I. Is like I go to the gym and lift weights to build certain muscles deliberate outside of artificially creating the gym. And the weights are meant to probably designed to push certain muscles from doing it out in the real world, right?
Yeah.
Instead of working on farms, I sit at a desk all day and I work. So I don't get in my steps. If I want to look a certain way and move a certain way through the world, I have to recreate artificially living in a blue zone.
Exactly. You're essentially creating like a miniature environment or ecosystem for your body to live vicariously. Essentially, it's just slightly less enjoyable being at the gym than maybe being out in the field, but or not, depending on your circumstances or not.
And and your preferences.
Exactly.
So I wanted to get back to the razor griddles, not to like harp on those, but you said they sent you 7. I imagine they're large, and you've maneuvered them, like moved them through the world. So what did you do with the 7 initially? And then how many of them do you have left? And how have you moved them through the world as you move through the world?
So initially they sent them to me in London, and I had a single bedroom flat with a shared garden, and they were a lot bigger than I was expecting. So I was like, please don't send me any more. But then new models came out and they sent more. But at the time, there's this 4-burner. I've just got a new one that arrived yesterday. But there's a 4-burner that is just colossal. And it says on the box, 2-person lift. And I was just living with my wife, and she was like 8-9 months pregnant at the time. So there's no way she's helping me lift this goddamn box. Like, the effort it took just on those initial 7 far outweighs anything in terms of moving them throughout the world. So I shipped a 4-burner and a single burner over to Latvia. And that wasn't necessarily, you got a man in a van who just loads it onto the back of a truck and takes it out. And then I sent by boat another 2 griddles to New Zealand, which are the 3-burner and then like a hybrid one that's got a grill and a griddle on it. And moving those around, not necessarily a big problem. I was amazed that they actually, especially the ones that went overseas, didn't rust at all. I was expecting to get to them and they were just going to be an absolute dog shit, but no, they were fine. So that was very good. But in terms of wrangling these things, they're not actually as bad as I make them out to be. Actually, no, they're great. Yeah. They are the most portable griddle on the market. They've got wheels, they fold down, you can wheel them around, you can take them out camping and all that sort of stuff. And so basically I was ending up in a situation where I didn't want them to ship me another 7 griddles because it's just it's expensive and I don't need 7. And so I ended up giving some away. So a couple of 2-burners, a 3-burner. So I gave away 3 or 4 of them. So I think I ended up with 8. Yeah, I gave away 4 and then kept 2 in Latvia and 2 here. And it seems like no man should have 8 griddles, I don't think. And so when I used them, part of the thing is that the initial 7 or 8 of them, I had to just shoot a video on each of them. And so I did video here, video there, video there, and then just slowly just started giving them away to people. And everyone's like, you should sell them. And I was like, no, I've already used them. You can't. It's like giving away underwear. I don't necessarily think that's the way to do it.
Yeah. You said you moved into an office building. Like, what did we mean by move into an office building?
So there's this like a car workshop, like a Mercedes workshop, and he owned the building. Well, his dad owned the building, and then there's office space above the building. So the second floor was like 3 offices, a corner office, and then another office, and then another office in the corner. And so I basically, the whole plan was that I was going to use it as a workspace, but also live there, and then also rent it out. So my sister and my other friend Mohan ended up living in the building as well. We just had a huge amount of space, and I wasn't even earning that much. But they took so long to move in that I was paying the rent for the whole building for ages. Basically ended up being a shithole. But the whole point was for it to be a creative space where I could like use it as an office as well.
Yeah.
Ended up renting out all 3 rooms to other people and then putting in like Japanese paper doors in for my own bedroom, which is terrible when the lights are not connected.
Ooh.
So people would turn the lights on and it'd be like 5 a.m. and blasting through the doors or in the door or actually in the room. Yeah, that was a bad idea. I don't recommend anyone do that. Hybridized living is not nice.
Yeah.
It also leaked like crazy. It would rain and it was like it was raining inside.
Ooh.
That was bad.
No.
But yeah, the whole point of that was when I was still in like film mode. I was ready to sort of like, okay, let's turn this into a creative space. We'll get a ping pong table. We'll make it like Google headquarters.
Yeah.
I don't have Google money, so that was a bad idea.
I appreciate the initiative and the ambition.
I think it was about a month after that I started getting into like full on. Like I set up my first Instagram account and started getting the show on the road with that.
What do you, I mean, maybe it's this moment or something else, but from going to film school, right, to being a screenwriter to content, is that what you would consider yourself, like a content creator?
I guess so. It's one of those things where like, I'm not sure I want to be doing this forever. I mean, before film school, before anything, I was writing books. I wrote and published a novel that was terrible. I was 17, published it when I was 21. It was an awful book. But I was doing that first. I'd like to think that I'm a storyteller more than anything.
Yeah, okay. I like that. We can go with that. I think you are a storyteller. I think your voiceovers are great, and that's storytelling. You just kind of use the food as your platform to scratch that itch.
Try to.
Yeah. Along the way, right?
Yeah.
What would you say one of the most pivotal moments of your life or career would have been?
Ooh, there's 2. Probably getting into film school was one. So I published the novel, and I wouldn't have gotten to film school if I hadn't published that novel. The person that let me in said, your book was terrible, but you wrote a book. And so I think that set me on path. And then there was an accelerator, like a pulse partway through, well, not partway through, nearly at the end, where I made a film with my friend Lucy. It was a feature film, and it was a huge challenge. We had basically no budget. And I think that was the next step in terms of changing me internally. It's basically saying to me that I can do this. You know, if you can make like 80 minutes of a feature film and get it cut and done on no budget, I feel like I can do anything at that point. Yeah. And so that was a big one. She's gone on to do festival short films and is being funded by the government. Being funded by the Film Commission in New Zealand. So she's doing a lot. So we co-directed that film. I went one way, got into television. I was working at Discovery Channel for a while, TV networks in New Zealand. Still, a food thing was already there. So there was no great leap with that. And Instagram wasn't even really it either. It's just sort of happened to be like where 2 waters meet and create something different. So I'd say that both of them are film related, but yeah, entrance and creation are probably the 2 of them. When someone opens the door for you, it's an amazing feeling.
Yeah, I can imagine. Thinking about that, right, from your journey so far, looking back on it, what's some advice that you could give your younger self? We all learn along the way, right? But are there any moments in your time you're just like, I wish this is so easy. Somebody would have just told me, or that I should have known better. I would have gone further faster, or I could have avoided this very easy hurdle that was along the way.
That's a very tough question, because where I am now with 2 children and a wife, I wouldn't want to change anything that's happened. I wouldn't want to go back and change anything because, butterfly effect, who knows where I could have ended up. And I'm very happy where I am now. But if you wind back the clock to just before I got married, I'd broken up with my ex-girlfriend. I was in London alone. Yeah, there were things that I would have changed. I would have basically gone back and said, when I was about 14, 15, I probably would have, and I was already interested in movies and films, and I just didn't have the confidence to, I did try to make a movie, but I would have just persisted longer. I didn't really dust myself off after my falls and keep on persevering. And I think there is a way to do that. obviously I can't do anything about it, but every person I come across who is looking unsure about what they want to do, one of the things I always say is just start something. If you don't like it, you will find a way. You got to start walking the path before you know what you want to do. No one's going to expect you to know what you want to do and you have no life experience. So just start experiencing things, get on the path, and then eventually you start turning corners, opening doors, and you will find what you want to do that makes you happy. I've just gone through this in the last episode of YouTube, but not necessarily happy, but content. I think content is the first target anyone should be aiming for.
Yeah.
You don't have to stay content, but
Yeah.
they're good mile markers.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's never going to be the right time, the right moment to do the thing, to write the book, to start or travel or whatever. The stars are never going to perfectly align. You just have to do the thing, right? For this podcast, for instance, I had the idea to do this in the summer of last year. We recorded a few episodes and, persistent. I'm not consistent, but we're getting there, right?
All it takes is one episode for it to really kick off.
Well, yeah, I just published episode 1 that was recorded maybe in July of 2023. But if I waited for that episode to be perfect, which it isn't perfect, for it to be perfect, I would have had to have re-recorded the conversation multiple times. Now I know, now that work product is out there, it's completed, it's as good as it's going to get published. I now have informed myself of what I need to do better for this podcast and podcasts to come.
Do you know Peter McKinnon on YouTube? He's got the saying, I'm not sure if it's his saying, we'll attribute it to him. He says, done is better than perfect.
I always get this quote wrong, but Voltaire had said something like not allowing perfect become the enemy of good, something to that extent.
I like that.
Yeah. There's never going to be the ideal moment. The work product, you can always get better at doing the thing. However good you are, and a lot of people, myself included, formerly, now I know enough that to get it out there, right? You got to do the thing, you got to publish it. And I think it's also cool. One of the reasons with the first guest, we talked about sort of dancing around. Is it good enough to put it out there in the world? We're just going to put it out there. But I also want it to be to look back on it. And I want to show people and illustrate to them, this is where I started. And hopefully where I started isn't where I land with this. And I hope to show improvement over time with how I conversate, how the reductions of ahs, ums, and likes that I use. I don't know how I've been doing so far.
I think it's pretty good.
But
the thing is, I think ahs, ums, and likes are kind of natural. I mean, it's approachable. And people talk like that in normal day-to-day life anyway.
That's
and you're
fair.
A good conversationalist. We've talked on Instagram, but we've never actually met until now.
Yeah.
And we're talking famously.
Yeah, I would think so too. Appreciate that. So I think you alluded to this a little bit with your last response, but not necessarily happiness. I know content should be achievable, right? A target. And then I think happiness looks differently for different people. And I would say this looks differently for different people as well. But what do you want to accomplish with your storytelling if you have sort of a direction in mind right now? And does that coincide with what success looks like for you?
What do I want to accomplish? That's a really tough question. There is no overarching story with the food content that I make. I'm going to be real. Each individual video is an expression of what I'm feeling in the moment. The tonal shifts in those videos are wildly different. Some days I'm low on energy, some days I'm not. The direction is directionless. It is a pure expression of emotion through the lens of food, and that's basically it. I've just finished another novel. It's a horror novel. It's got nothing to do with, some little bits have to do with food, but in general, I want to slowly convert my short 1-minute storytelling escapades into longer and longer formats. Because there's a lot going on in my brain that I need to unload. If people find that entertaining, great. If they don't, I'm still going to do it. It's just something that happens. So in terms of compartmentalize things like Instagram, Instagram at this point is an outlet, and occasionally some advertising for Race Griddle. YouTube is a expansion of that outlet, but heading more in the direction of where I want to be in terms of storytelling. And food is a really relatable thing that people can get behind and people can enjoy. And if I can use that to express ideas, express information, inform people, and encourage people and motivate people to get in and cook or just try the thing, then I feel like that is what success is for me. If I can impact in a positive way and see people trying stuff, more people trying stuff, and actually like getting in and doing the thing, then I would consider that success. I mean,
That's awesome.
there's no way of tracking that metric.
Right.
My followers may grow, but there's no way of actually seeing. Well, there probably is, but there's no way for me to see how the impact has been on other people. But if there has been one, great, and maybe people will tell me, but who knows?
Yeah, I like that. I like how you seamlessly tied those two together. Well done by you. If someone listens to this or someone sees your content, is impressed or inspired, and they want to try to do what you're doing in their own way, right? Specifically storytelling or creating like the food content, what's your number one piece of advice that you would give them to get over that inertia?
Nobody is watching you, at least at the start. Nobody. Things are easy to do without an audience. And then as the audience grows, so does the pressure, but it equalizes faster. If you were to go straight from 0 to 100,000 followers on YouTube or Instagram, it's going to feel very daunting. But just remember at the start, and probably for quite a while, nobody is watching you. And I think that is a really liberating way to look at it, because it allows you to express yourself the way you want to express yourself without worrying what people think about you. And it's a long way of saying, don't care what people think. It's very easy to just say that. So you need to contextualize it. And the context is, out of 6 or 7 billion people on this planet, and you upload something, nearly not a soul is watching you.
Have you ever heard of the spotlight effect?
No, go for gold.
So spotlight effect is, like you said, you're not that important. Nobody cares. Nobody's following you. Nobody cares who you are. And the spotlight effect is basically, when we go into like a crowded bar by ourselves and we feel like this pressure, like all eyes are on us, nobody gives a shit. You just walked into the bar by yourself. Like nobody, you're not that important. And especially if you're putting something out online, like I always joke that if there's a like, it's probably coming from my mom or my family at first, and like maybe that will grow from there. But yeah, you got to start somewhere, and then you can't certainly let perfection get in the way of doing that.
100%. And the spotlight effect it's 100% correct. It's almost like when you do something that you perceive to be embarrassing in a social situation. I've probably gone home and talked about that. Nah, man, they don't care.
Yeah, no, like you're not that important.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, also if they did, like, why are they wasting time? There's the two types of people who talk about people and people who talk about ideas, right?
Yeah, I like that.
Does it really matter for the people who talk about people necessarily? This ain't TMZ. Life is not that.
Yeah, exactly. As we try to wrap this up and bring it in, what are you working on right now? Like, what's most important to you right now?
Okay, so that changes quite rapidly, but I've got open at the moment on my DaVinci Resolve Ambient Feast Estonia. So that's the next step. We drove through Estonia on the way back to Latvia after the Finnish episode, which I released the other day. So that's on my mind, on my agenda, as well as doing an edit of the novel, which is called Birch. Maybe I'll get an agent. Maybe it'll get published. Maybe it won't, but it's been fun writing it. And I suppose just like keeping up the flow of content creation and storytelling on Instagram. So those are the 3 things that are occupying the most of my work time. What's occupying the most of my time is children. It's simultaneously fun and horrifying, but yeah.
And if people want to check out your social handles or follow you or check out the Airbnb feasts, where can they find you
at CasterAzucar on everything. People have told me to change that name many times, but it's just like, I'm in it now. I can take this to the end.
Just go with it.
We've just gone through this whole thing. What about you? What are you focusing on?
Good question. Thanks for asking. I think my focus is on trying to get focused, I would say.
The gym is helping that. The gym and the exercise. Do you find that it channels your focus more? Because it does when I do it.
I get my best ideas when I'm on a run or when I remove myself from like the actual work. Part of what I do is, I consult or coach people professionally, and I will leave those meetings, take my notes, leave my desk for the day, and then I'll go on a run and be like, oh, they should do this. Like, they're not doing this. I had the thought the other day when I went for a run. I left the meeting, go for a run, and then I'm just, just not even like, it's just in my subconscious. I'm not actively stressing about this or anything. But I'm like, oh, these people are always concerned about the immediate things that need done at hand. I was like, they need to have a strategic meeting once a week to make sure they're keeping their eye on the prize and not getting distracted by these things. And that was a thought that I had while on a run. So then come back, write it in the notebook, present it in the next meeting of, this is an idea I had, this is what I think you're missing, and this is how I think it can improve what you're doing. The gym is one of the things I always tell people you should focus on. What season are you in, right? So because you can only have so many like front burner and back burner activities going on before you start burning shit. So my challenge is, I'm curious about a lot of different things, and I'm ambitious about a lot of different things. And I know it's not in my best interest to pursue all of them all at the same time, but I have a hard time trying to say, no, I don't. Like, I want to do a podcast, but I also want to have visible abs by summer. So that means I'm working out 3 hours a day, right? Like, I also want to learn Portuguese, and I'm tired of my Portuguese tutor. I think is tired of me not putting enough effort into learning Portuguese. Duolingo? So no, I use an app called Drops because Duolingo only has, most of the popular apps only have Brazilian Portuguese. I'm trying to learn
it's not the
European.
same, because I'm on it for Spanish, because my Spanish is like semi-functional. Whenever I talk to people who are from Spain, they're like, what are you saying? Even people from Argentina, what? So why are you speaking Mexican, man?
Yeah. The challenge too is, like with Portuguese, probably with any language, is like you learn it one way, maybe speak it slowly, maybe that's part of what I mean. But then in Portugal, like everything just sounds like a run-on sentence to me.
I used to do QC at Discovery Channel, and they'd have these advertisements that would come in, and they would be in Portuguese first, and then you'd listen to audio track after audio track. So it'd go Portuguese, Bulgarian, Russian, and Polish, and maybe Dutch. You could hear the Dutch because it sounds like Dutch, and then the three other ones would sound, to my untrained ear, like pretty alike. But then also there'd be these times where Portuguese would sound like Russian, and I was just like, like they're just so monotone. I was like, this is all these like strange noises.
Agreed.
I'm used to it now because like Latvian, I've been learning Latvian, and Latvian's got a lot of odd noises as well. It's very, very unique language. 33 letters in the alphabet, and basically nothing to do with Russian, and then just all these very strange noises. Difficult. It's really hard for my dumbass English-speaking mouth.
One of the benefits of growing up in the States is no one really gives a shit about learning a second language. So it's easier to learn, say, probably a third or fourth language if you've learned a second. And I've never invested one. It's never been a focus of the education system here. And therefore, I never focused on doing it until I became an adult and learned things about the world. Everybody else outside of the United States speaks multiple languages, and that's normal to them. But here we are.
I mean, Europe, maybe.
Well, Europe, yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's true.
Maybe not like, Europe, Africa probably speak multiple languages, and maybe parts of South America. But I had the challenge of conversing with my in-laws because they didn't speak English, and at the time I didn't speak any Latvian, so that was like, I think it really stretches your brain into doing things that it's not used to. I think it's good, especially as I get older. I just turned 35, and I'm just like, I'm losing my hair. I'm getting all calcified. I'm just like, oh my God.
I think as I learn it, I'm intrigued by the idea that learning a language, I always used to think it's like a one-to-one, like this word means the same. It means that word, but it doesn't work that way. And I find that super intriguing because in European Portuguese, I'm not going to try to pronounce the words here because I'm going to get them wrong. They have a word for lunch, but they also have like sort of a word for breakfast. But that word or combined words means little lunch. So they don't have a breakfast. It means little lunch. If you translate it literally, translation means like little lunch. And too late in the podcast to get into the obesity problem in the United States. Perhaps referring to breakfast as the little lunch would go a long way with trying to solve that problem.
Not having a pancake stack for breakfast.
Right.
I mean, Latvian's got this other strange thing going on now, but like, so you got fingers. We've got fingers, and I'm not going to pull up my feet, but we got toes, right? So in Latvia, they've got fingers, and they've got leg fingers. So it's pirksts. And then for the fingers, Kaya's pirksts. And it was just like the first time my wife said to me, oh, what about your leg fingers? What are you talking about?
Put that in your novel.
I just like the strangest look, right? Like imagine your thumb where your big toe is, and they're all that long. It's crazy.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate the process of learning it because it gives you a different way of looking at the world. And, I think it also helps inform me of, I genuinely believe if people would call breakfast little lunch, there would be different habits around what breakfast is.
I mean, even if you break down the English word breakfast, you're essentially breaking a fast. That's all it has to be.
Yeah. Not, stack of pancakes, sausage, eggs.
That does sound good. Let's not kid ourselves yet.
It's fantastic, but should it be an everyday thing?
Probably not. A weekend thing after a hangover. That's like an appropriate time.
Yeah. So I guess my focus is trying to corral my focus.
Have you tried yerba mate, the Argentinian tea? That shit is like legal crack cocaine. Give it a go. Like anytime I want to focus, a couple of rounds of that, and I am like laser focused on whatever I'm doing. Caffeine, but it's like different caffeine. Yeah, but you don't want to rely on it either. Like having the motivation to do it yourself is a good feeling, right?
What I mean by focus is like I'm motivated and I'm always busy, but I don't have the bandwidth or capacity to do everything I want to do effectively all at the same time, right? Because I'm spending 3 hours a day, not every day, but like sometimes I do spend 3 hours in the gym. Like I walk for an hour, I lift weights for an hour and a half. That takes a while. Days that I run, that's maybe just an hour out of my day. So like that's a focus. I'm trying to learn Portuguese. That's another hour at least that I should be devoting to that, plus working, plus trying to have a podcast. And it's just,
where do you find the time, right?
Yeah, I'm running out of hours in the day. And
I mean, a 40-hour work week, man. Do you work for yourself or do you work for a company?
For myself.
And you stick to the 40-hour work week for your main source of income?
Yeah.
If I was in your situation, I mean, you probably already are, but I'd be going, it sounds like you got a lot of meetings, so that does just take time naturally. But wherever I can, I'm just like, how can I make this faster?
Same. Or delegate.
Delegation is great.
I'm not a big Facebooker, but I'm missing out on something here. So I joined a couple groups on Facebook that were relevant to what I'm trying to do. And one of the groups was virtual assistants or something like that. And I was like, okay, sounds interesting. I could probably use this. I'm going to join. We'll see what happens over time. And I'm not like reading comments or anything like that. I'm just sort of having it there to make sure I don't forget that it exists. And then because of the podcast, I published the first episode, and I was like, a lot went into that I didn't necessarily anticipate. And it's something that somebody else can probably do for me, and I can just proof it and be like, yeah, go ahead, upload the episode. And that takes that off of my plate. Like I want to stick to what I would call my high value activities is having a conversation for 100, but need an hour and 27 minutes, right?
Yeah.
But that's my high value activity. And if I can outsource the editing and uploading it and writing the description and doing the thumbnail, then that creates efficiency for me to delegate that to somebody. But getting back to like not having the time to do that, I posted the job description of what I need somebody to do, like administrative things, and then a bunch of podcast related things specifically. I posted that to the group. I got what seems like a lot of like legitimate interest in resumes. Like I think I got them, it was either Sunday night or Monday. I haven't looked at them. Like I haven't had time. Like I was like, oh, by sure Wednesday afternoon, I'm going to have time to get back to everybody that inquired. And it's Friday afternoon for me here. And I have not even thought about doing it. So I think it's just a matter of getting things off my plate somehow.
Do you procrastinate with other work? So I procrastinate with something I have to do with other work I have to do.
No, not necessarily. Well, yes. Yeah, I guess that's a form of procrastination. I talk about you can be busy or productive. Being busy isn't necessarily doing the things that are going to help you be productive and get the right things done at the right time. I try to be mindful of does this thing need done now or should I be doing something else? But yeah, I guess that is a form of procrastination and guilty.
I'll need to edit a video and I'll start writing my book. But I need to edit the video, but I want to start writing my book. But then when I have to write the book, then I just can't be bothered. If it's work, if someone frames it as work, it's all over.
One of the things I started to do, I was doing this pretty consistently, is I would set timers for myself, right? I would sit down like, okay, this is my to-do list. This is the highest priority item, maybe like 5 minutes past noon. So I'm going to give myself 55 minutes to focus on this one thing. And I'm going to put my phone upside down. I'm going to put it on Do Not Disturb. I'm just going to focus on this. If anybody else out there struggles, it works marvelously. When you are deliberate about how you're going to spend your time, it doesn't actually take that long to move some of those big rocks that you have to move. It just requires a little bit more diligence and focus, and setting the timer, identifying the task, setting the timer helps me get through the things. But, I think for me, my biggest problem is really distinguishing between what is my focus now and what things can I get to later, because I want to do everything now. Like I want to, like, I really enjoy the podcast. I want to spend all my time on that. Can't do that. I also want to work out all the time. Like, can't do that. I also want to try to learn Portuguese. Okay. And then I have to try to make money. Oh, like,
Yeah, I mean, I'm in that situation as well because I know I have to scale up what I'm doing in order to have a sustainable lifestyle. Because I need to start doing like product photography, product video. I've sort of got things underway with that, but like getting the order sorted and then, prioritizing is such a huge step in becoming productive. Like figuring out what you need to do and when is like, that's half the battle I've found.
Yeah, agreed. Prioritize and execute.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, just like you set a 55-minute time. If I've got like an hour to do something, I used to look at it and be like, sweet, I can cram in and edit. I can do this, I can do that. But these days, it seems to just, I don't know if it's having kids or what, but the wind up into work mode takes like an hour. So I'm usually just like, unless it's like a minimum 2-hour period, I'm not bothering.
I've heard like some guy on YouTube said like he had like a 5-minute rule. And if he ever had 5 minutes of time to kill, he would spend it doing something productively. He would get out his to-do list. I find that helps too. Not that I would like adhere to that 5-minute rule, but sometimes if I only have like a 20-minute window or a 15-minute window between meetings or something, I'll pull out my to-do list, be like, which of these items isn't an edit where it's going to require a focus? Like, I have to make a hotel reservation. I can make a hotel reservation in 15 minutes, right? I have to respond to these emails. I can probably respond to these emails within like that 15-minute window instead of saying, well, it's only 5 minutes. It's only 10 minutes. I'm just going to scroll on Instagram mindlessly.
Are you single or are you like in a partnership at the moment?
Single.
I wonder how hyperproductivity affects your relationships, as I know it's affected mine.
Oh, all right. Do tell.
Any waking second I can find work to do. There's always stuff for me to do. But I have in the past had trouble reining that in, especially when I've always been in relationships. So reining it into a point where like the first thing when I've got free time now, I'm better at it now, isn't necessarily I should be working. Because I do find it like, work does punish your personal life quite a lot. And there are situations, even not in relationships, there are situations where, it's the weekend and I can find time. I can be like, I can work all weekend. This is fine. But then it comes at the detriment of your intimate relationships, your friendship relationships, all your relationships just can get punished by hyperproductivity, I've found. So now my life is about finding that balance between, personal life and private life and clearly delineating work and personal life. Because in the past, they just slowly mushed into one, especially with stuff like the YouTube series Airbnb Feast. We were going away on holiday and I'm like filming and this and that. And then sometimes you just want to like, do you mind if I swear?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Turn that fucking camera off. Can't we just have like a normal holiday for once? And I sort of tried to scale back a little bit. And especially with kids, it's just not feasible. But like, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. There's a time and place for everything.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of hyper productivity, but at least I have a name for it now. I don't think it necessarily has impacted. This is like a hobby, right? People have hobbies. People play golf. I'm not good at golf. I don't want to try to play golf. I'd rather try to figure out how to have a podcast. That's what fires me up. Like,
when does the hobby become work? This started as a hobby for me as well. When you're good at something, it naturally sort of moves in the path of like.
I guess that would be ideal for me. If I could spend my days getting paid to have conversations with interesting people doing interesting things. I mean, that's not my intention for the podcast necessarily. Like, I just want to have interesting people, like interesting conversations with interesting people, learn from them myself, broaden my horizons, and hopefully put it out there in the world to do the same thing for other people. But if this ever gets to the point where this hobby becomes work, sign me up for that.
I guess it's the same for me as well. Because like while I was in London, I was still having to work at Discovery Channel. The minute it becomes, I guess I had not had the feeling of being fully self-employed though, like you have. I think that would be like dropping me into an ocean and being like, it's all yours. It's just going freaking nuts.
Yeah.
So I guess I kind of like, I don't know. I have to figure it out. We'll see what the next months bring me.
Yeah. It's a journey, right? It's a journey. As we wrap up this hour-long podcast. You got any final thoughts, questions, or takeaways that you want to put out there for the universe?
I have enjoyed this conversation in the sense that, apart from the fact that it's been a very easy and very fluid conversation, I've enjoyed what the self-reflection I've actually got from it. I don't know if that's what you're intending for this, but I've learned some stuff today about myself. And looking at the way that you operate compared to the way that I operate, I think I don't do enough self-reflecting to know what is necessarily right for me. Maybe I just need to get out of my head a little bit. Because now that you've asked the questions and now that I've said them out loud, they're down there now. And I feel like I can use this as a reference point. So it's actually been really, really liberating. The things we talked about, stuff, it's well out of my wheelhouse. And I think that all that talk about focus, suddenly like scattering the focus slightly and sort of seeing the lay of the land has been really, really good. I thank you for that.
Not my intention, but happy to have that as an unintended consequence.
Maybe that is the theme. I mean, you said you didn't want small talk, and I don't think it has been.
Well, I appreciate you making the time, Greg. Is it a Azucar? Is that how you say it?
Azucar. I guess so. It's
Azucar.
Spanish, but like, yeah. I don't know. How would people want to say it? Spanish people say it correctly. Maybe not.
I might not pronounce it correctly, but it will be in the show notes so people can find it there.
Hell yeah.
Boom. Well, Greg, we'll wrap it up there. I appreciate you making the time. I also really enjoyed the conversation today.
I appreciate it too. Thanks very much for having me.
You're welcome.
And that's it for today's conversation here on the Randall Osche podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you've enjoyed listening as much as we've enjoyed recording it. Many, many thanks to our guests today for sharing their knowledge, their experience, and their life lessons. If you found today's conversation insightful, interesting, inspiring, please join our growing community by subscribing to the Randall Osche podcast on your favorite podcast platform and never ever miss another episode. We'd love to hear your feedback, so keep the community alive by sharing your takeaways from today's episode and use the hashtag Randall Osche podcast. Your feedback and interaction fuels our continued efforts to build a safe space for meaningful, long-form conversations. So thank you so much for the support. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep the conversation going.